On this episode of the Star Trek Universe podcast, Matt and I, we're going to find us a couple of low-mileage pit woofies and help them build a memory.
Best line in the episode, by far. Best line in the episode. We're talking about Season 1, Episode 24 or 25, depending on your numbering system, The Neutral Zone, right after this. Welcome to the Star Trek Universe podcast. My name is Matthew Carroll.
I am David C. Robertson.
It's good to hear from you, David C. Robertson. Hear you're not feeling very well right now.
I'm not. I got a, twinge in the old hinge.
I don't know what the old hinge is, but I hear your back hurts.
Yep. Lower back. Yeah. Spasms. Bad things.
Yeah. Man,
icing it down.
Well, the benefit of your pain is we get to podcast today.
That's true.
You know? So, I feel like I'm the winner here. I and the audience are the winners here. You know, you thank you for being our...
sacrificial back? I don't know.
Thank you for being our sacrificial, whatever. Let's not.
I don't want to say lamb. Let's not get too sacrilegious.
Well, it's way better than what I was going to say at first.
What were you going to say?
Thank you for being our own personal podcast, Jesus.
Oh, no.
All right, let's move on.
No.
And this episode is the Neutral Zone. This is going to continue our series on our Picard Primer. We're watching episodes that seem to lend themselves to Picard-centric things that, not just the character, but the series. So we're talking about Data episodes, Romulan episodes, Borg episodes, and 7 of 9 episodes. Like, trying to focus on the themes that might lead into Picard, the series. And this was a really intriguing episode because it is the first hints of the Borg that we get in Star Trek, which is a big deal. It's also the first time the crew interacts with the Romulans in Next Generation. Not interacts, but at least, interacts. They have a few conversations about the Romulans earlier in the season, but this is the first time they have a face-to-face. By the way, first speaking part of a Romulan on TNG, played by Mark Alamo.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Gul
Dukat from DS9, who I saw and immediately recognized him as Gul Dukat. But even though this episode had tons of just reading a synopsis, we were like, we've got to cover this episode. It's the first interaction with the Romulans and the first mention of Borg activity. And it turns out not to really have that much to do with Picard or 7 of 9 or Data. So we're still going to talk about the episode, and we're still going to do sort of an episode review because we want to do that. But, we'll get to kind of it's small connections with what it says about the Romulans and the Borg. So what did you think of this episode, man?
I thought it was a particularly weak episode in terms of overall Star Trek ideology, in terms of the characters and who we know those characters to be. But it was also a really fun episode because I liked the A-plot a lot, and I wanted a lot more of it. Yeah,
so the A-plot of this is a group of 3 survivors from a cryonics satellite that was apparently some sort of cryonics satellite that has drifted away from the Earth and is now all the way to the Romulan neutral zone 200 and some odd years later. 300 and some odd years later, I guess. And these are 21st century Americans that have woken up. And really the episode is an attempt to draw a distinction between who we are now and who we are in the future as the Federation.
Yeah.
And I think it sort of does that in a clunky way. It felt like the most 80s episode of Star Trek I've ever seen.
That is most definitely not the most 80s episode of Star Trek that I've ever seen.
I mean, I'm definitely willing to hear you out on that. The thing that makes it feel 80s to me is just like the sort of stunt nature of like the fish out of water plot. It just felt like an episode of Alf or Harry and the Hendersons, like in the way it was just like, hey, it's normal people on Star Trek. Like, and it's also the season finale of season 1, which I thought was a really odd choice.
That is, yeah.
And like, I can imagine the promos being run for this. What if a country singer, a financier, and a housewife show up on the on the Enterprise? It's like a weird. It was just a weird for Star Trek and for where the show goes and what kind of season finales and season premieres we get in the future. It's a really odd choice.
My favorite thing about that is I was just thinking, the last time the Enterprise, intercepted a cryogenic ship, it didn't turn out well.
No. And they just unfreeze them immediately. No one mentions the Khan problem.
Yeah, well, I think I'm pretty sure Crusher looked at him like, oh, they are definitely not genetically superior.
Yeah, it was probably pretty clear what was going on here.
Right. So I don't think that was an issue. It was just funny that like in Next Generation they do it and it's just like, oh, they're just normal people.
Yeah. Yeah.
But the funniest thing about it though to me was that they weren't superior. It was very clear that the point of this episode is that they were inferior.
Yes. Like
everyone on TNG talks down to them like they are shit.
Yeah, I totally agree, especially Picard.
Yep.
Especially Picard is a real asshole to them.
We have grown out of our infancy.
At the end of the episode, they have the chance to save those people months of travel back to Earth by taking a day off their course or a couple days off course to drop them off at a different station. It's going to get them home faster. Yeah. And Picard's like, it will be good for them to acclimate. And really it's just he wants them off his ship.
He may have had a point though.
I don't think he had a point.
I think there's a justification there, but for sure this is a super clunky episode and there's a reason for that.
Why? What's the reason?
Well, I don't want to get... Well, I guess, it doesn't matter if we get to it into trivia. They were basically shot a first draft.
Interesting.
From a guy who doesn't know a ton about Star Trek. Like, it wasn't his... Maurice Hurley is not his wheelhouse. Star Trek is not his wheelhouse. And this, first draft got written, and then the writer's strike happened.
Oh, okay.
So, they were absolutely forbidden from writing anything else on it.
Gotcha. That makes a lot of sense, and it makes sense why it ended up as a season finale, because it's like, we just need something to make this last episode of the season interesting.
Well, also Maurice Hurley intended it to be the first part of a trilogy.
Oh, okay.
It was supposed to be somewhat of a cliffhanger because we never really resolve the Romulans and the Federation working together to figure out who destroyed those bases. Like, it turns out later through a mention or something that it was the Borg, but it was intended to be the Borg, and it was intended to set up an alliance between the two that would, wind up counteracting the Borg when they come back. But
interesting.
It just sort of kind of faltered.
When Q Who, which is later on in next season, I believe, it's the Enterprise's first official interaction with the Borg. In Q Who, they are doing the same thing that we see here, which is entire bases being uprooted. In the first appearance of the Borg, which we did not put it on our list because honestly it's a little bit, the Borg they're kind of proto Borg. It's almost like they didn't fully have the idea for the Borg fleshed out. But in that the way that they sort of, instead of assimilating humans or any other races, what they do is they just take technology and they just lift entire bases out of the ground. And that's what's happening here. And I think that may be the only reason we know that it was the Borg in this case. But yeah, that's what happens to a future in Q-Who when he throws them in the path of the Borg.
Right, and they had a few false starts in the Borg. One of them being the neutral zone, and the other one being that episode. What is it called? I can't remember what it's called. It's the one where all the parasites are inside of the people in Starfleet.
Okay, I'm not familiar.
There's an episode. It's from season 1, I believe. Where they're like Starfleet has been completely taken over with these like worms.
Okay.
And then at the end they send out those worms had sent out a signal. Like, but it's one of the more gruesome episodes of Star Trek because like they just straight up like shoot this dude and blow his head up, and then like the worm comes out of his like open torso.
Wow. That's real gross.
Yeah, dude. It was, yeah.
It's really, really gross.
I don't understand why I can't remember the name of that episode. I'm looking it up. I'll figure it out.
Well, in the meantime, the episode we're covering today, it's fine. It really, not much happens. It's just this group of 3 people are thawed out. One's like, as I said, a country music star. One's a financier, and one is a homemaker, as they call her. And,
Conspiracy.
Okay.
It was the episode before the neutral zone.
Oh, okay. Okay, cool. Well, I'll get to it soon. We're doing this Picard Primer rewatch, but I am watching every episode. So I've been buzzing through season 1, trying to get through all the episodes of Star Trek TNG before Picard comes out.
Right.
So I'll get there very soon.
But the signal at the end of that episode was supposed to have been like a call to the Borg.
Interesting. So that happens directly before this episode. So they really knew they were going for the Borg soon. They just didn't have, any real plans. Like, it doesn't seem like even in that first appearance, Q-Who, that the Borg assimilation is even a thing that they do. They even go to a nursery where the Borg, they actually call the Borg a species, and they say that it looks like the Borg are not born with these implants, they get them later or something, so it's interesting. They just didn't have that fully planned out, and nothing exactly conflicts, but I suppose it's possible they could also have a nursery where they turn babies into Borg. But
well, yeah, I mean, why not?
Yeah, why not? And apparently they do, but I don't know that is ever mentioned again. I think that's a one-off in that episode.
We see him float. We see him, I think, in Voyager. We see Borg babies.
Yeah, maybe. I don't remember. And I know we see children Borg. The thing is, I think the implication of that episode is that they are a species where that's their primary form of replication. Like they have babies that have implants added at an early age that become Borg.
There are definitely Borg babies on Voyager, but I just felt like the implication was they assimilate whole civilizations. Why would they just leave the babies there? Obviously, they would just assimilate them too. Yeah.
It's just the way they frame, the way that Riker says it is it appears that it's a species. Like he acts like it's a species of people. The Borg are a species underlying themselves. They aren't a mixture of a bunch of different species as we know them to be now.
Yeah, that was a reasonable assumption at the time.
Yeah. Okay. So, they obviously, they talk a lot about, this financier character is supposed to be a, reflection of how far the Starfleet has come now that they've left money behind. Mm-hmm. What did you think? I felt like that argument. I mean, like, I love the idea of the Federation. I love the idea of there being no need in space. Like they've gotten past the point of need.
Yeah.
Because of matter replication, all food and shelter is taken care of. So now the society is about something different. But I thought it was interesting because they really tackle it head on with this financier, and really the financier gets the last word, which is kind of a bummer. He says, Picard says, it's all about possessions. He's like, it's not about possessions, it's about power. And he says, what kind of power? Control of my life. Control of one's life is the most important thing. He's like, that's not, that's a fantasy. And he says, well, I'm here, aren't I? And it's like, oh, okay. Well, yeah, this guy clearly won his century, kind of, like.
Yeah, I did like that. And that's one of the things I like most when Star Trek does it well is when they present two sides, but neither side comes out on top necessarily. Like, there's always food for thought, and I like that idea. Whereas, like, you had your priorities a little mixed up, but you are here right now. Like, one of the things that's interesting is, like, clearly in Star Trek, previously and subsequently, life is valued.
Yes.
But here in this episode, Riker is like, yeah, whatever you do, Data, just do it quick. I don't care. Save them or don't.
Yeah, no, and Picard is actively annoyed that he saved them.
They're already dead. What were you going to do? Well, they're here now and they're alive, so we have to treat them like they're people. Like, what the hell, man? And then you have Crusher, like, people in the 20th century were terrified of death. Ha, ha, ha. We embrace it now,
Yeah. It's a really, really clunky episode. And in, like, what it says about the Federation. And, like, the thing, like, you mentioned, talking still more about that financier guy, you mentioned that, obviously his priorities weren't right, but the thing is, it doesn't really ever give us evidence of that. Like, I would have liked that conversation where Picard actually, I guess, has a good reason to say why that guy is wrong. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Instead, he just acts disappointed and acts superior to that man, and it irks me because he's not willing to engage with the man and have an intelligent conversation. He just acts superior and, like, doesn't, I don't know. It's almost like Picard's disappointment is supposed to be the only arbiter of what is right and wrong in that moment. Mm-hmm. It's like, oh, Picard's disappointed. Clearly this guy did something wrong.
Now, what's funny, though, is that is actually, I feel like, very in line with Picard's character, especially when you look at First Contact, and he just, like, suddenly becomes very, like, condescending to Lily, and he's like, in the future we don't have money, or we don't care about material wealth. Like, he does that condescending shit. And early on in Next Generation, he's very, very haughty and condescending and acts superior.
Well, and she gets to stand up to him too, and, like, prove that he's wrong and he's out for revenge. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like, you're not that evolved, Picard. You're just Ahab with his whale,
right?
And that's so now we're getting to the heat of the meat here.
Ew, that sounds disgusting. The heat of the meat?
I don't know where I forgot that phrase from. But I've heard it before. And
Please, never again. This is worse than your Cyclops toe on Facebook. Go follow Matt on Facebook if you want to know what I'm talking about.
Yeah. Got a good Cyclops toe going. Okay. So I got to tell the Cyclops toe story. So I bought a bunch of googly eyes because I saw just a big package of googly eyes at Walmart. And I have a brand new dog, 17 weeks old. He tore up in my Walmart bag and just tore these googly eyes. And I was planning on being funny with the googly eyes, putting them in random places around my house so that, like, when you opened a cabinet, there'd be two eyes looking back at you, stuff like that. Thought that would be really funny. But instead, my dog tore open the bag and all the eyes just stuck to the dog. So he was walking around rattling because he's got all these eyeballs stuck to him and just little eyes looking from every part of the dog. It's really funny. I don't know why. It made me laugh. Anyway, so those have been all over my house all week, and so I stuck one on my toe and put a picture on Facebook.
Yeah. What I love is there was something in your mind, there was a phrase in your mind or something very close to it where you said, "Oh no, my plan for the googly eyes was thwarted."
Yep, that's true. That is a thought that went through my head this week.
Oh no, that's not what I intended those googly eyes for.
Hey, come on. I embraced it. I was pretty zen about it. I was just like, that's as good an outcome as any.
Yeah. But, like I was saying, though,
the heat of the meat. We were getting to the heat of the meat.
Picard was an ass. He's a military type of guy. He buys hard into the Federation.
Yeah.
He buys hard into the philosophies taught in what is considered civilized society in the 24th century. And, even in the first episode, he asks Riker to make sure he doesn't make an ass of himself around children. And the softening of Picard is a real character arc throughout the series.
He's really he tries hard to be less rigid and less superior to everyone. But it's still there, and I think it's a big part of his personality, and I think it could play into, there's that scene in the trailer for Picard where he's yelling at that officer, like, it's what the Federation stands for. It's what the Federation still should stand for. Like, he has such a rigid belief of what the Federation should be. Yeah. And I wonder if they will examine that, or if, because it's sort of his swan song series,
it's just a hill for him to die on.
Yeah, which can also be a lot of fun, but I kind of like that. I'd prefer them to examine him a little bit. And, him have some flaws that we get to really uncover and evaluate, and him to grow through. Because I feel like if they just make him, he's the captain and he just needs to win, that's a less interesting story. But I also know that Picard is such a venerated character that we might not get much flaw within him in this new series.
Oh, don't you believe it, man. It's going to piss off every Trekkie ever because, so many of these people will be like, "Oh, Picard was never like that." Go back and watch the show, y'all.
Yeah.
Picard's got flaws, serious flaws. He's a total ass. And he believes in the Federation to a fault. Like this, and, if I know Kurtzman and Michael Chabon, they're going to present some flaws.
Yeah.
I definitely think they will.
I think you're right. And I'm really hopeful that you're right. So that's some pretty interesting stuff about Picard we saw in this episode. Like, what do we see about the Romulans?
Well, don't put anyone who has subpar acting ability next to Mark Alamo.
Yeah, I agree. And I don't even know if... The hard thing is, I think the guy to the right, whoever he was, his name was Fee, I think, on the episode. Mm-hmm. Mark Alamo's character, a Tabak, or whatever, Romulan word, is really showing a lot of personality. And it seemed almost like that other guy who was picked to play the other Romulan had a confusion about what a Romulan was. Like, he was like, "This is a Vulcan, right? I'm a Vulcan." And he's an arrogant Vulcan, which is to be expected. He's basically the same thing. He's he comes off pretty bad next to Mark Alamo, for sure.
Like, they're just playing two different types of guys anyway, but...
For sure. And that's okay. Two guys in a species can be very different.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just, the line delivery of the guy that's not Mark Alamo is just so bad.
Right.
I don't know. It was really distracting to me. Every time he was on screen, I was just like, why is he... Oh, no. And it's not even like captivating like Christopher Walken bad acting. It's like Christopher Walken's acting is so bad that it's actually really super good and creepy.
Right.
Just because it's not really acting.
It's off
his
kilter.
acting is just it's quirky but he talks like that in real life.
Yeah, and it's interesting because it's so quirky that you're like, it sets you off balance.
Yeah.
So I think we did get a big speech from Troy. She gives a psychological breakdown of who the Romulans are. And she says first that they're basically supremacists. They're arrogant to a fault. She says it goes beyond arrogance.
Yeah. Which is funny to be telling Picard in this episode.
Right? We just had that discussion about Picard. He's like, well, that's not very Federation of them. And he also says they're very curious, which is interesting. I really like the outline of the Romulans here because they don't come off like mustache twirling villains. They come off as villains, but they come off as they also say that they shouldn't be the ones to attack first. Generally, they're going to wait and see what you do. They have a fascination with humans. All of that to me is very interesting. They also killed Worf's parents. Which, I don't know that that'll play into the Picard series, but, it could. Worf could absolutely show up.
For all of its flaws, this episode did set up a lot.
Yeah, for sure. It's like they already had the book written on the Romulans, and they already had this plan for the Borg, and they were sprinkling it in, but then they didn't, this episode itself just didn't close on anything.
Yeah, and they also disregarded some stuff in here, because, Worf said, when they were meant to be our allies, and then that's not a thing they ever, I don't think, touched on again. They were not their allies. They had a rivalry they were feuding basically for years, decades and decades before that. Now, there was an uneasy Klingon Romulan alliance back in the original series time during the Enterprise incident. Which is the reason they gave for Romulans suddenly having Klingon ships. And that's why they did it, because they didn't have they didn't want to spend the money. It was the third season episode, and they didn't want to spend the money on, or they couldn't afford to spend the money on Romulan ships, on building Romulan ships, and they already had some Klingon ships hanging around. D7s.
That's interesting. That's so interesting.
Yeah, so they threw in a line about an uneasy Klingon Romulan alliance.
Very interesting. Very interesting. So one thing I thought about in this episode that I'd never thought about before, and I don't know why. It's really obvious. Really, really obvious when I think about it, but I don't know why it never really crossed my mind. America's known as the melting pot. It's I never really considered how the Federation is sort of that for space. Because almost every other kind of major power is sort of a single race. And I was just thinking about the Romulans and how arrogant they are and how supremacist they are. And I was like, oh yeah, I never realized. I mean, I kind of realized the Federation was an analog for America just because it was made by Americans and they're the good guys or whatever. But the idea of it being a melting pot and the idea of the multiculturalism of the Federation is kind of they're the only multicultural game in town. I guess until you get to the Zindi, which is 5 different cultures and weirdly before this and after this.
Well, the Dominion, if you want to count them.
That's true. Yeah. The Dominion is another one that comes down the pike later. But yeah, they're more they've been conquered by another race. A single race has conquered 4 races or whatever. So that's a little different, but yeah. I don't know. It never really dawned on me until this episode. I don't know why, as much as of Star Trek as I've watched and talked about.
Yeah, it's weird, man.
Yeah, I don't know. Just thought that it was an interesting thing I noticed that has probably been noticed by everyone else, but I never really thought about it. I guess I just never thought about the fact that it's weird. It's one of the things that's weird about the Federation is that they're such a melting pot, and then that they're a place for all cultures to join in on. And we kind of call them humans because it seems like there's more humans than anything else in the Federation for some reason. But, they incorporate, in many ways, they're like the Borg in that they incorporate all these different, cultures into their own. which, in a kind way, but still.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Another thing the Romulans said in this episode was, matters more urgent caused their absence, but we're back. I wonder what the matters more urgent were.
I don't know, and I feel like that was something that we were supposed to find out, but...
Oh, like if this had turned out to be a trilogy.
Yeah, but we could probably headcanon it as they have said, the Romulan government is never, like, completely very stable. Like, there's always... a new faction coming in and like doing away with the old guard. So
right, and that's another trait that we didn't really learn this episode, but it is something that goes on to be a thing we know about the Romulans. Anything particularly we learned about Data in this episode? Other than that he wouldn't mind being a traveling country singer.
Right, he's not a robot.
He's not a robot. He's an android, and there's a distinct difference that they did not tell us, which I was slightly annoyed by, and I realize it's probably in another episode, and I know I can probably look it up, but like I was like, come on, don't tell a nerd there's a distinct difference and not tell me what that distinct difference is. This came out at a time when you had to like look things up in encyclopedias.
Well, he probably had like a note in the script to look it up, and then he couldn't do it because of the writer's strike. So
right, that's really funny.
I don't know.
The difference between a robot and an android is only their appearance, with androids being made to look like humans on the outside, but robot-like internal mechanics. Mm-hmm. In other stories, authors have used the word android to mean a wholly organic, yet artificial creation.
All right.
So, androids look like people. Robots do not. That's what that is. Okay.
Not in that Twilight Zone episode.
Right. Yeah. I'm sure that all just depends on which fictional world you're talking about.
Well, but she's a robot. She's a woman.
I don't know the Twilight Zone episode, but I'm sure.
Oh, it's fantastic.
Nice. One of my favorite moments was when the country singer says, "All my stuff will be forgotten. I'll be a bigger hit than I ever was." And cuts to Picard and he goes, "Perhaps so." And it's like such a condescending asshole thing. Like, he clearly knows this man is not going to be a big hit. And it's just like, perhaps so. He's such a condescending asshole in this episode.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, one of my biggest problems was, like, Riker was such a dick about, like, seeing those three, ha ha ha. I wonder how humankind even, survived. And I'm like, what did Claire do? Claire is a perfectly reasonable, sweet individual. She's not a, dickwad Wall Street piece of shit. She's not some, like, substance abuser who's, looking for his next high. Like, she's just a lady who died of, an embolism and misses her family.
Yeah.
And she's not even being hysterical. She's just, like, quietly weeping in a corner.
Yeah, she's just upset. Like, this episode is weird. I'm not a big fan. I'm not a big fan. Cool that it establishes stuff for future that we're definitely going to be talking about a lot in Picard, but overall, mostly skippable, I think, this episode.
Yeah, I do wish that we had gotten follow-up. I wish that we had, like, on Deep Space Nine or something, at least, come back to Sunny or something. Like,
oh, yeah, that would have been real cool.
Yeah, I would have liked to have seen that.
I looked up these actors, by the way, to see. Like, I was so confused by the 80s nature of this idea to me. And of just like, hey, I know it's a show about the spaceship, but now we're going to bring people from your time. You know what I mean? Or like close to your time. Look, it's a country singer. It just felt like I could imagine the 80s ads for this episode. Like I can imagine that line, "I'll be a bigger hit than I ever was." Like, that just seems like the exact thing they would focus on for an ad for this show.
I don't know.
It
doesn't feel like a Star Trek: The Next Generation ad.
Yeah, no, I'd love to see an ad for this episode, actually. Like, I'd really love to. I'm going to look around YouTube, see if I can find it.
I bet you can.
Oh, yeah? You think so?
They have a bunch of them up where it's like, next time on Star Trek: The Next Generation.
All right, well, then I have to look it up. And see if we can see. Oh, yep. TNZ Neutral Zone trailer. Here it is.
On the next episode of Star Trek: The Next Generation.
Commander, look at this.
The crew discovers frozen survivors from the 20th century.
What's going to happen to us?
In the middle of a perilous mission to confront arch enemies.
You think that we attacked your outposts?
Could this feared encounter spark an explosive battle?
I recommend we go immediately to battle stations.
Find out on Star Trek: The Next Generation.
Okay. It pretty much just focuses on, it does mention the people frozen, but then it almost completely focuses as if the episode's going to focus on the Romulan attack or whatever. Mm-hmm. And it's like, yeah, that ad is what I kind of would rather have this episode have been. But it's mostly just about that the A plot is definitely the characters, these 20th century characters.
I feel like it switched, actually. Like, I feel like at the beginning of the episode, the A plot was definitely like the characters, the frozen people.
Sure.
And then by the end of the episode, the B plot was the A plot, and like they had sort of shifted them to like the B plot. Right? They were just like, oh, what were we doing with them? Oh, we're just going to take it back to Earth the long way around.
That's why I think this episode does not work. Is those two storylines are just not tied together well. In the best cases of Star Trek is when the B plot does something to support the A plot, or the B plot provides a way of solving the A plot or something like that. Or like if this if the financier or the country star or even better the homemaker had like done something to help them make peace with the Romulans.
I think they did. I think the Wall Street guy, because remember he said it's about power, and he like exhibited a certain amount of intuition, and
there's
that Picard perhaps lacked. And then when he's on the bridge later, and they're trying to figure out like what the Romulans know, and he's on the bridge and he's not supposed to be, and he's like, they don't know either. He's trying to find out what you know. And Picard kind of looks at him with this moment of realization. He goes, yes, he's right.
Yeah, he's like, get him off the bridge, but he is right. And it made me feel weird about that financier character in that they did nothing to show me why his worldview is wrong. But I felt like the episode just treated it like it was super wrong. And I know from from Star Trek perspective and from, especially Roddenberry perspective or whatever, like at least the classic view of what Roddenberry's vision is. I realized that he's supposed to just be wrong because he's a capitalist, and I just felt like, hey, well, show me that. Don't just make the captain disappointed in him.
I feel like that was like the intention at first, but then it felt like they were trying to make a statement of like, because it was a little heavy-handed how superior acting everybody was acting. Like, I feel like that may have been like fleshed out better in a second draft or whatever. Absolutely. Where it was like, oh, they think they're better than these 20th century people, but the 20th century still has a little something to teach people in the 24th century. Like, they could have like,
yeah, I agree.
Really pulled that in.
I totally think there's a good episode here, but this isn't it.
Right. You can see the bones of it.
Yes, absolutely.
Like, that's supposed to be a cool opposing philosophy that makes Picard think about his situation.
Yeah. But I don't know.
Now it just looks like a femur.
I feel like at this point in Star Trek, there's not a lot of that. And there's a lot of opposing views on the ship a lot of times. Like, I've really been enjoying my rewatch of this series, and I think a lot of it, there actually are a lot of times where the crew disagrees. They don't have fights about it, but they'll disagree about the course of action, and they throw out their reasoning, and that it's just like a classic, battle for who's correct, and it's all based on reason, and that's really cool and fun to watch. But I don't think they have done much up till now. At least the first half of the season is what I've watched recently, where someone else convinces Picard that he's wrong and needs to change his ways. Like, they don't do much exploration of like really digging into if the Federation's view of things is right. Now, like we just did Measure of a Man. In that episode, Picard is wrong up top. Picard is viewing Data as a possession. And he allows himself to have his mind changed by Data, who says, why wouldn't you make everyone lose their eyes? Geordi's eyes are better for our purposes. Why shouldn't everyone go blind? And he says, well, I see. It's because I'm an android. I have less value. And Picard goes, like there are moments like that. I don't feel like this first season 1 has many of those. Right.
Then that's probably mostly due to Roddenberry's control.
Right. And his slipping control as it moves forward, which I think is generally a good thing. I think the show becomes better. Yeah. So, also, another thing about season 1, since this is the last season 1 episode we're going to cover, the sets look awful. Everything that's not the Enterprise looks so bad. They're just going down to all these different planets, and all the walls just look cardboard. Like, it just looks real bad. And I realized the budgets weren't as good. They hadn't built as many sets, and whatever. It's fine. I'm fine with it. But watching it, I'm like, is this the 1960s show, or is this the 80s show? Like, this doesn't look much better. A lot of the episodes, when they go down to the world or whatever, the worlds look pretty similar to what they do in the remastered versions of the original series, Yeah. Which, I'm fine with. It's fun, but I do think it looks pretty bad.
It doesn't bother me. I guess it's weird. I'm weird like that.
Yeah, no, I also am not super bothered by it, but I think it's funny. It's funny how bad things look sometimes on this show.
There's a weird thing that in my head where I think I almost prefer it to look really bad. and I think it's because I've really tried to think about why people say, this looks bad, this does not. And it's like you said, you could tell they're cardboard sets. Well, no, they're not. They're the same exact things they use to make today's sets with. They just have perfected it a little bit more. They weren't those, the original series sets weren't cardboard.
I just say they looked cardboard. They just look very flimsy and fake. They don't look like real walls. They don't. And in the future, when they make these sets, they do a lot more things like little recessed panels and kind of things to make the walls feel like, especially the ships. In later TNG and DS9, the ships look great.
Yeah.
They look really good because they really build those ship sets to look like metal, and they look good. I don't know. A lot of the planet sets look real flimsy to me.
But what's funny about the later series? I feel like the set designs are so bland and so boring to me. They just look like it just is. There's like the visual I'm sorry, I'm having problems with words too. It's like the visual equivalent of ants in my brain, man. It's like there's always just like what you were saying, little recesses in the panels, needless designs in the hull, all sorts of weird horse shit in the background that's just supposed to look like gray or metal or militaristic, and I'm like, there's no color. I remember the Enterprise D was kind of a earth tone ship inside, but at least it felt warm.
Right.
And it felt like a place where families would live. The Enterprise E on the inside just was the most bland piece of shit. And so was the Defiant, so was Voyager, and I'm pretty sure they're just redresses of the same damn ship.
Interesting.
To save money. But
it's interesting. I prefer that aesthetic. And I mean, this comes probably from what we grew up on. I grew up on TNG more. You grew up on the original series more. At least that's where you got your start watching Star Trek. And the original series is definitely a lot more colorful. And I think that I grew up with that aesthetic, and I like that aesthetic in my spaceships. I like a sleek, fairly plain design, really. I don't know, kind of the cooler instead of the more vibrant.
Well, it depends. The in the movie era, I really enjoyed, kind of the strange late 70s, early 80s motif of the first few movies. When they get to like the Enterprise A, I love how it's like all white inside, you know, and
right.
I really liked that. You know, you can call it the Apple Store if you want. I really liked that on the JJ ship.
Yeah, I think white can be really interesting because it's such a stark contrast to what's moving against it often. Mm-hmm. I think white for a ship can look really good. Anyway, we have gone way too deep on this episode. We're getting I was thinking this was going to be one of our quicker ones, and we've been going for an hour here talking about an episode that neither of us thought had much in it. So,
do you want to talk about some trivia or anything?
Yeah. Throw us some trivia.
All right. Well, first of all, I did want to say I really enjoyed the part where Data said that he thinks a homemaker must be some kind of construction work.
Yeah, that was funny.
So they had mentioned Romulans, but Gene Roddenberry didn't feel comfortable enough to bring them in because he wanted to establish Next Generation on its own without a bunch of, races from the original series.
That's interesting.
Yeah, and apparently he felt okay with it by episode 26.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that didn't make, I think, like, especially if you're a big Star Trek fan, you love the original series, this episode would have been very exciting. So I guess, I was talking about how you don't have a lot of, it's a weird finale, but I guess if you're a huge Star Trek fan at this point, and then suddenly the Romulans, who you've only really seen on screen in Balance of Terror, right?
Balance of Terror and the Enterprise incident.
Okay. And really, like, that's it. And now they're back, they're back, and they're not only back, they're proclaiming that they're back, and they've been gone a while, but they're back now.
I hated that line.
Oh yeah,
I hated that line because it was just like, we're back, and it was just as like on the nose as Picard's last bit where he was like, no, the journey will do them good. Besides, it would make us go back, and our mission is to go forward, and it's just begun. There's still much to do. There's still so much to learn. I'm like, shut up.
It's so interesting. It's super cheesy. I get it. It's so interesting when that's okay and when that's not, because it didn't bother me. Neither of those things bothered me. But I get it. Like, we just started watching Watchmen, as we may have mentioned on this show. Check out Who Watched the Watchmen, our new Watchmen after show.
But not ours, but yours.
Yeah.
My Jason from DC on Screen.
Me and Jason from DC on Screen. Yeah. We talked some about that. Like, Watchmen, the comic, is very sweeping, super flowery dialogue, and as is the movie. And the new show is very grounded, down to earth dialogue. And we were just discussing how, like, we kind of miss that, but also we acknowledge that it would probably be a mistake for the series.
Yeah. You mentioned Mark Alamo being Gul Dukat. This is actually his second time on Star Trek. He was a character named Badar in Lonely Among Us, and he went on to be Gul Musset in The Wounded, and he was Frederick LaRouche in Time's Arrow, and then finally Gul Dukat in Deep Space Nine. Oh,
yeah, that's cool, man. I love that kind of, I don't know. I love that Star Trek, because of the nature of Star Trek, they can have those actors come on in so many different roles. It's really neat. I was watching the first appearance of the Ferengi the other day, and Armin Shimmerman was one of the Ferengi.
Yeah,
it was one of the first appearances of Ferengi, and goes on to play Quark. And that was amazing.
He had the most lines too, so they kind of wound up, molding that species after him.
Yeah, it's really neat.
Let's see, when Deanna Troi was showing Claire Raymond her family tree in the original version, the names on it were like the first 6 actors to play Doctor Who. And they also had Mary Richards, Lou Grant, Kermit the Frog, Miss Piggy. But in the remastered version, where you would actually be able to see it really well, they changed it to CBS Digital and TNG actors and production staffers and stuff.
That's really fun. Yeah, that's what I thought you were going to say. It was people from the production, but no, they went like super silly with it.
Oh yeah. I think that is pretty much all I really care about.
Cool.
As far as trivia, there's a whole bunch of trivia on Memory Alpha, though.
Yeah, I'm sure by the time now that we're doing TNG, and not Discovery, which is like brand new, there's going to be tons of trivia about all this different stuff. So thanks for digging through all that stuff, Dave, and finding the interesting bits. That's really cool.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of interesting stuff. It's just, good Lord.
Right. We can't talk about all of it. But yeah, guys, thanks so much for hanging out with us. We are really enjoying doing this Picard Primer. We're really going to be, we've narrowed it down. I guess we should mention the episodes we're going to be doing going forward, at least the next one. The next episode we're going to do is a biggie, Best of Both Worlds, Part 1 and 2.
That's right.
And I'll go ahead and read these off in case any of you want to get into some of this. Best of Both Worlds, Part 1 and 2. Then we're going to do the next episode, Family, which is where Picard goes and visits his family. We're going to do Unification for some Unification Part 1 and 2 to get some good Romulan in there. We're going to do I, Borg, which is a really important Borg episode. A Hugh episode particularly. Descent Parts 1 and 2, All Good Things Part 1 and 2, and that wraps up the TNG. Then we're going to do a little Voyager with Raven, The Gift, Drone, and Unimatrix Zero. And then we're going to watch First Contact and Nemesis. And that will be our Picard Primer. So if you guys want to jump ahead, watch any of those.
I thought we had cut off the Raven and added Star Trek 2009.
We decided to add the Raven back in, but we could add... I don't think we talked about Star Trek 2009.
Well, that's where the star blows up that the Picard's all upset about.
Yeah, but I feel like most of that is actually the comic book. I mean, like, yeah, it mentions it in the movie, but I don't think we need to cover that whole movie.
I agree. We should watch or read the comic. And talk about it.
Okay, well, we can discuss that when we get if we get through all this. Maybe we'll do the comic. I'm really bad at getting through a comic book. We just did it for the Watchmen. It took me way too long. So I'm sort of like, let's do the TV shows. I'm a real good consumer of television. I'm real good at it. But yeah, no, I think that's a possibility. We might do the Countdown comics because they really do. The problem is that I'm worried that they are going to change things and that those Countdown comics are going to be useless. I feel like they're going to be true to the series for sure.
If they do change things, at least we will be prepared to acknowledge it.
That's true. So we'll those are the TV and movies we're going to watch. We might cover some of that comic once we get there. So the next thing, Best of Both Worlds, Part 1 and 2, next week. So y'all come hang out. If you haven't subscribed yet, subscribe. We'll be back real soon. Peace.
Live long and prosper.
To reach out to us, hit us up at StarTrekUcast.com, at Star Trek UCast on Twitter, or search for the Star Trek Universe Podcast on Instagram or Facebook. And if you want to hear more from David C. Robertson, search for the DC On Screen podcast in your podcast app now, or go to maladjusted.tv for his comedy sketches. If you want to hear more from me, Matthew Carroll, search for the Marvel Cinematic Universe podcast or the Orville Universe podcast in your podcast app, or check out my music. Just search for Matthew Carroll wherever you listen to music.